Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. This will be a Maoist-Third Worldist critique of progressivism. At the outset, let me say that I have never been a progressive, or at least I have never defined myself as a progressive. My first entry into politics was when I was 12. And I began referring to myself or thinking of myself as a communist when I was in the New Left. And then as I progressed more, I went through a variety of different communist tendencies, but none of them were associated with progressivism. I was always a revolutionary communist, although admittedly my view of what is revolution or what revolution should become has shifted to some extent over the years. Now my view of revolution is largely shaped by Maoism third worldism, which means I don't think that the first world is ready or prepared because of a lack of dialectical or revolutionary potential to have revolution at this time. That does not mean it won't be in that situation in the future, but for now, I don't think it is. And so I think that the best that we can do in the world today is resistance now. Resistance, resistance may look like progressivism. For example, I can support BLM, Black Lives Matter, although for all I know, Black Lives Matter might be dead. I have been trying to find out some activities in Black Lives Matter, and I have been unsuccessful. I used to wear a BLM cap all the time. I haven't worn it in a while because I'm afraid that somebody will come up to me and say, "What is that?" BLM has not been in the news recently. Does that mean that police killings of unarmed Black men and Black women have stopped? Of course not. They have stopped. I remember because I had a friend back in the 1970s, 1971, 1972, a guy named Jack, who was considerably younger, I should say, than I am now. But as a kid, he seemed quite old. And Jack was a high school football fan and a high school basketball fan and a high school baseball fan. But especially he liked basketball. And he would always make sure that he got to the gym early so he could get a front row seat in the bleachers. And this day was no exception. At this time was, I guess you could say, the tail end of the Old South. The Old South was still around, but it was dying. I remember going into a physician's office and seeing that there were two sets of restrooms, one for whites and one for blacks. It was the first time I had ever seen anything like that. Had I heard of them? Yes. But hearing of something like that and actually witnessing them firsthand is an entirely different matter. There was also a waiting room for whites and a waiting room for blacks. I don't remember if people actually paid attention to that. It's a long time ago. I also don't recall if people paid attention to the black and white restrooms. Maybe, maybe not. That was beginning to change, but still, the old habits die hard. And changing that would really have meant, I guess, remodeling. So it made me kind of disgusted, honestly, to be in that waiting room. I was there because I had food poisoning. I went to a restaurant and had bad meatloaf. And I was home, but somebody suggested to me, well, you really should go and have it checked out. And so this person recommended a physician to me where I went. The physician was okay, seemed like a reasonably nice guy. I did not bring up the issue of the black and white waiting rooms and the black and white restrooms. I was a kid, I was only 14 years old. And so I was not even sure how to broach that topic. But it was still very depressing to me to see that. BLM at that time had not yet existed, and yet my friend was killed by a white police officer for refusing to give up his seat to him in the front bleachers. I was not aware at the time of how common that was, especially in the South, not exclusively, but especially in the South. I was not aware that lynchings were still taking place. We would occasionally drive by and see KKK people dressed up in full costume with a white hood, and that would also shock me. But I did not know what to make of it. What do you do as a 14-year-old kid when you see something like that? I tried to make sense out of it, but I honestly could not. It was a shame I was not older and able to really comprehend it and deal with it in a more intelligent way. But at that point, I was still mourning the death of my dear friend Jack. I love Jack. I used to go over and sit on his porch. He would tell me stories of the past, some really nice stories, and some stories that were rather sad about his own life and about the life of his parents. But I found them all to be extraordinarily fascinating, and I would love to go to Jack's place and have him tell me even more stories. It was one of the highlights of my time in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Everyone knew Jack because Jack did not play the game. Most African Americans in Orangeburg, when they saw me walking down the street, would cross over to the other side of the street. I found that to be odd. I found that to be extremely uncomfortable. When I would see a black person in a store, the black person would address me as sir. What do you make of that? An older man, sometimes an elderly man, addressing me, a 14-year-old kid, as sir. And yet, BLM, although you can argue, I think justifiably, that BLM was a progressive movement, it certainly was not a revolutionary communist movement, meaning it was arguing for change in the capitalist world system. Certainly valid change, but considering that we are living in the capitalist world system, in the first world, that was, I guess, the only thing that we could do. I still think that in the first world, if we are going to do anything, it is going to be resistance. And from a communist perspective, I see BLM as a type of resistance. I even saw the Occupy movement until it was shut down by the FBI in the US to be a type of resistance as well. How effective those things are, I don't know. I doubt they are that effective. Why? Because we still have multi-billionaires. The 1% is still around. Police killings of unarmed black people is still a phenomenon of everyday life in the US. So how effective was it? But still, I think it is valid to stand up and demonstrate one's resistance to the capitalist world system, considering that here in the United States, we are not yet ready for revolution. Maybe we never will be. I don't know that. I don't think the third world and the fourth world are yet ready for revolution either. So, in my opinion, in order for that to happen, the capitalist world system would have to come crashing down. I think that developing communism or revolutionary socialism in the midst of the capitalist world system would be a failure. That is my own opinion. But I doubt it would be terribly successful because we would be basically trying to build something and at the same time fighting something which is ubiquitous, which is essentially almighty. We would be competing with a system which is all around us, which is omniscient. So I don't know how effective we would really be. I think that really the third world and the fourth world, after the destruction of capitalism, can then perhaps, and I hope, begin the process of building revolutionary socialism and communism through revolutions. What those revolutions will look like, I have no idea. But I don't need to. As a Marxist, I look at current material conditions. And those current material conditions right now, as a first worlder, tell me that I need to practice resistance because I am not a first worldist, meaning I am not somebody who believes that revolutions can begin in the first world. I think they will begin in the third world and the fourth world. I wish they could begin here. And for a long time, I believed that was possible. But eventually, I realized how wrong I was. And I realized that twice, sadly twice, because I left Maoism, third worldism for first worldism and only came back to it this past June. In my opinion, I literally wasted 10 years of my life. I am trying to make up for that right now. I don't know if I will succeed, but I am doing my best to make up for it the best way that I can. That is not progressivism. Resistance, although it may look like progressivism, like my support, for example, for BLM, my support for the Occupy movement when it did exist, is not progressivism to me. Even though I may find myself working alongside people who are progressives, because I recognize that that is not the end. That cannot be the end. I met a woman in a Chinese restaurant, a wonderful woman, a trans woman. We had a really long conversation. She came and sat down at my table. We talked for about an hour. Meanwhile, the people at her table were wondering if she would ever come back. Eventually she did, and she actually did have dinner. But she was fascinated with me. I don't think that she had ever met a communist, much less a Maoist-Third worldist. She was trying to persuade me to get involved in fighting for democratic socialism. That was her objective in the conversation. But to do that, she said, I would have to join the Democratic Party. I told her I could not do that. And I asked her if she knew that communists, any kind of communists, were generally opposed to the duopoly of Democrats and Republicans. And she said yes, but she was hoping that I would be an exception. And I said, I I simply cannot do that. I cannot become a Democrat, and I wish you good luck. I hope you are successful in your endeavors. From my perspective, even though I know you don't see it that way, you are engaging in resistance. I try to engage in resistance too, but I don't see that as the be-all and the end-all. That for me is merely a step along the way to the time when revolutions may, perhaps in the distant future, become possible in the first world. So I don't like progressivism. When I go onto YouTube and I look up the left, what I generally find are sites like the Young Turks, the Secular Report. I could name a bunch of different ones. There's no point. If you have gone to YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. The biggest progressive network on YouTube is TYT, or the Young Turks. And do I like TYT? No. To be honest, I don't like it. I don't like it because the people who are in charge of it, especially one person that I will not name because I'm saying something not necessarily bad about him, but not complimentary either. He is very insistent that he represents the left on YouTube, and he is very condescending toward people that he sees as people who are beneath him, people who are not to him a part of the left. But here I am as a Maoist-Third Worldist, and I do not consider this person to really be a part of the left. A term I have used here before, which I will use again, is left-ish. Certainly, I guess he could be called leftish, but not leftist, because what he supports is reforming capitalism. He is not a communist. In fact, I watched a show he once did. I believe it was with his nephew. I don't think his nephew was exactly a communist either, but at least he was further to the left than this particular person was. And he was attacking his nephew. He was attacking him. And the guy was saying, the host of the show was saying, how can you call yourself a leftist when you are attacking the left? He said, but I am the left. And his nephew said, you may think so, but no, you are not. Now, did I agree with his nephew? Yes. Would I consider his nephew as being on the left? No. Point is, I am so far to the left that nobody, hardly nobody, I guess, or hardly anybody, would identify with me. I realize that. I accept that. I accept that I am too far to the left to be accepted by the vast majority of people who regard themselves as leftists, especially progressives. Progressives want to put a patch on capitalism. They are like Edward Bernstein, the lifelong enemy of Red Rosa Luxemburg. He came up with the idea of evolutionary socialism, that there's no need for a revolution. You can simply establish socialism or communism through evolution by making gradual changes. I guess you would call that being a democratic socialist, or maybe a social democrat. I would say that perhaps people like Bernie Sanders might agree essentially with Edward Bernstein's ideas. But Bernie Sanders is not a leftist to me either. AOC is not a leftist either. The so-called squad in the House of Representatives in the US is certainly not leftist. There are no communists, either in the Senate or in the House in the US, nor is anyone likely to be elected that is a communist. Being a communist, I think, would be a disqualification. About 10 years ago, roughly 10 years ago, I had a student ask me, why don't you run for office? The student knew how far to the left I was. And I said, well, do you think I would win? So I put the ball back in his court. And he thought for a second, no, but it's worth trying. And I said, why is it worth trying? And he said, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not worth trying. So simply by asking him questions, I convinced him that my running for office would be a total and complete waste of time. And I don't want to do things that will waste my time. I want to do things that are productive. So for me, resistance is productive. For me, conscientization is productive. For me, making these podcasts as a type of conscientization is productive. There are other things I do that are productive as well, including writing the book I am writing right now. That to me is also very productive. Running for political office? What could I do? What could I possibly do? I look at Bernie Sanders. Although I don't look up to him, 30 years ago, I read some things he wrote back then. 30 years ago, he was a democratic socialist. He was never a communist, but he was a democratic socialist. Then he joined Congress and eventually became a member of the Senate. And by working in Congress, I think just that fact moved him further and further to the right. Combined with the fact that people, as we age, generally go further to the right. That has not happened with me. For some reason, as I have aged, I have gone further and further to the left. Do I know why? No, but I am grateful for that. But Bernie Sanders is no longer even a democratic socialist. He is a progressive, which in most parts of the world is called a social democrat. And that is it. Meaning, in most parts of the world, Bernie Sanders would be seen as a moderate. But here, in the right-wing US, yes, the right-wing US, and I know that many progressives like to argue that the US is progressive. Well, maybe, but to me, progressivism is also right-wing. So here I say again, in the right-wing US, Bernie Sanders is right-wing, or maybe at most a centrist. He is certainly not on the left. Maybe you could say he is leftish, but being leftish to me is a type of being a centrist. AOC is leftish, not a leftist. There are no leftists in Congress, whether in the House or in the Senate. So I have no hope that anything will come out of Congress, that there will be any true revolution in the US or any place in the first world now. Honestly, I have no hope that there will be a revolution anywhere in the world now, a successful, lasting revolution. Why? because we are dominated by the capitalist world system. And in the capitalist world system, the best we can expect is for people to be leftish, progressive, in other words. It really bothers me when I go online and I see these progressives calling themselves leftist. But what can I do? Occasionally, I will make a comment. I did one time, and I will say the person's name, to David Pakman on David Pakman's channel. And David Pakman does not generally respond to postings, to comments, but he did respond to me. He was very defensive, and he insisted that, yes, he is a leftist. And I said that, well, I don't even think that you are a progressive. I think that is correct. TYT is progressive. Kyle Kulinski is progressive. David Pakman, progressive? No. No, I would say he is slightly to the left of center. So he is also leftish, but is he progressive? No. Not in my opinion anyway. But again, you're listening to the views of an old fart who has refused to abandon communism or revolutionary socialism for social democracy or progressivism, nor will I ever abandon it. Until my dying day, I will insist that the only way to really bring about lasting change in the capitalist world system is to overthrow that system, or realistically, I think, to watch the capitalist world system die a slow death of the dialectic, maybe a fast death. I don't know. But the dialectic, I think, will kill the capitalist world system. And then I hope the third world and the fourth world can begin the process of bringing about revolutionary socialist or communist revolutions. Take your pick on what term you want to use. It makes no difference to me. Then that can happen. And perhaps at some future time, assuming the first world is still around, and I am not optimistic about that, because I think that the first world may literally be planting the seeds of its own destruction. I don't think that there will be a first world in the future. I could be wrong. I can't say I hope I am wrong. I really don't care. What I care about is that there will be communism or revolutionary socialism in the world. Where it is makes absolutely no difference to me. But again, my major point is avoid progressivism. Progressivism is not the left. Do not be fooled by progressives into thinking that progressivism is the left. I am not saying that you should not engage in activities that progressives engage in, but see them as a type of resistance, not as the goal that we are searching for, which is only a goal of revolutionary socialism or communism. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.